This meeting is being recorded.
So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation and discussion. We are presenting today the new eDossier Riace local compact of a case of self-valorization of migrant labor in the frame of the global compact. This is a collective study on the case of Riace and its mayor Mimo Lucano, that by now has become famous due to his prosecution as well, but also and mostly because of his solidarious behavior. So this study was organized by Sinistra XXI, Transform Europe Observer Organization, with the support of Transform Europe. And before going on to introducing our discussion, I would like to introduce myself as well. My name is Katerina Anastasiou. I work for Transform Europe as a facilitator, and my focus topics are migration and global strategy and militarization. Transform Europe is a political foundation affiliated with the European Left Party. It's a network of over 40 organizations, left-wing institutes and research institutes and other networks. And we're very happy hosting this presentation today and honored to have two of the authors with us. Just to orient you a little bit on how today's event will go down, we're going to have a first presentation of the publication, and after that we will conclude with a Q&A session. For those of you that are with us today via Zoom, you will find on the bottom of your screen a designated button called Q&A. This is preferably the space where you will pose your questions. Alternatively, you can also use the chat for this. So I would like now to say a couple of words about our today's speakers. Again, welcome Alessandro and Fulvia. Thank you very much for taking the time today. Alessandro Tedde is the founder of Sinistra XXI. He's a lawyer and a jurist. He graduated constitutional law at the University of Sassari, got a postgraduate degree in Parliamentary Studies and Research in Florence, and he's currently attending the PhD in the European Union Law and National Legal Systems at the University of Ferrara. And Fulvia Teano graduated in Social Studies and International Security Studies, works as an IT security analyst for NNT Data Italia. Her research focus concerns primarily the study of fake news regarding migration and the role of government and civic society organizations in combating xenophobia, racism, etc. in the media. As I said before, Alessandro will begin this presentation today, and since the study was created by 4 co-authors, it will be an inclusive presentation of the holistic work. Fulvia and Alessandro will alternate in the presentation also to keep you busy. I will now turn off my camera. I will be here in case you have any technical problems. You can chat me up, and we'll start sharing my screen so we can kick off the presentation. Thank you very much both for being here today and taking the time, and for your very valuable work. I'm excited. I hope you're too.
So thank you everybody to be here with us. And I'm Alessandro, as Katerina told us, and I'm one of the 4 authors of this eDossier about Riace. And it is a part of a research project that we are doing with the support of Transform Europe, and we are in our first part, so we can say that we are now in the middle of the project, and we are now here to present this first part that includes 4 papers in this dossier. I want to give the word to Fulvia to introduce the dossier, but first I'd like to present Sinistra XXI in a very few words. And just to say that Sinistra XXI, Sinistra 21, it is an organization, we can say a think tank for the left in Italy. I'm one of the founders, and we found this organization in 2011. We come from a very wide, a various number of organizations like school students union, trade unions, and other social movements. And now we are involved in a lot of projects, not only of research, but also with an eye on action and direct action in various fields. Now we are part of the big family of Transform Europe, and we are very happy for this. And we are working on various topics, for example, migrants, but also the issue of anti-fascism and the problems of presence of the left in the media and other things. And we are very happy to move on these topics with the support of Transform. So I leave to Fulvia the stage.
Thank you, Alessandro. So, we did this research project. We published recently with Transform, as Alessandro was saying, is the first part of a bigger project which will be finalized this year and will be published in its entirety. So the title of this eDossier is Riace, Local Impacts of a Case of Self-Valorization of Migrant Labor in the Frame of the Global Compact. So it concerns the migration phenomenon in 3 different fields. So first of all, the non-signature of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration Agreement, the securitarian management of the migration crisis at the European, but mostly at the Italian level, and also the toxic narrative regarding the alternative hospitality experience of Riace and migration in general. So the outline you can see here is the same as the one in our publication. It's very much interdisciplinary. In fact, our group is formed by 2 jurists, also Francesco Nurra, which studies human geography, in particular political economy, and then me, which can be considered more a sociologist, let's say, and I do media analysis. So going forward, I will briefly introduce the publication with some general concepts which will be useful. We investigate the field of global governance and migration management. So this concerns tools and policies aimed at defining a global regime of the management of migration. So the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and the Regular Migration Agreement, which came out in 2018, is the most recent example of this management within an international perspective. So this agreement prescribes a legal framework and also a set of non-binding standards which are aimed at facilitating a convergence of migration policies on a global level under the supervision of the UNHCR. In this publication, we argue that this agreement actually disguises the real intent of global capitalist governance of migration because it represents migrants as human capital rather than focusing on their rights. So we link these to also the general context of migration and securitization we find in Europe and in particular in Italy, in fact, we see Italy and also other European countries have answered the high number of asylum applications by negotiating the agreements and also economic investments with migrant countries with the purpose of rejecting them, the so-called externalization. So we focus specifically on the case of Riace. So Riace can be considered a system of acceptance of migrants implemented by the municipality of Riace, which is a little city in Calabria. So the Riace model was defined, the Riace experience was defined a model throughout the years, and it went through a very complex and contradictory process. So it all started when, at the end of I will give now a brief introduction of Riace, of the experience of Riace. So it all started when, at the end of the 90s, precisely in 1998, about 300 Kurdish refugees landed on the coast of the small town of Riace, which had just around 600 inhabitants. So this event radically changed the history of Riace, which at the time was undergoing a very severe and rapid process of depopulation, and in which just over a decade, it will become known all over the world thanks to the work of one of its citizens, which is Domenico Lucano. So what happened after the landing, let's say, of these refugees in 1998 was that in 1999, Lucano founded the association Città Futura. So the association had the aim of promoting a series of initiatives directed at combining hospitality with also local developments and the recovery of the cultural heritage and the traditions of the region. So in the first years of the activities, the association invested its resources to obtain the allocation of numerous houses which were abandoned by the citizens because of the population. Which were then restored, and to create a widespread network of hospitality, which aimed at welcoming refugees and tourists in solidarity. So from there, the Riace village was born. And so new resources came to be about from the National Asylum Program and then the SPRAR service, and which allowed the experience to grow even further. In fact, 5 years after the foundation of the association Città Futura, the president of the association, Mimmo Lucano, was elected the mayor of the municipality. So we see that both from a social and an economic point of view, Riace was successful, at least initially, in revitalizing the whole area of Riace, and also in respect with the specificities of the territory, and also with the refugees' rights. We see that in the first year, the experience of Riace reaches a very global fame. In fact, in 2010, Lucano ranked 3rd in the world mayor list, and then in 2016, he obtained the 40th place on the list of the most influential leaders in the American magazine Fortune. So the latest news on Riace, so it's probably the criminalization of Mimmo Lucano. In fact, as of the 30th of September of 2021, Mimmo Lucano was sentenced by the court of Locri in Calabria in a first-degree judgment to 13 years and 2 months of imprisonment for a series of crimes related to the management and the reception of migrants during the period in which Lucano was the mayor. the investigation that led to this conviction, what is called Xenia, and actually stemmed from an investigation by the Lockery Prosecutor Office and also Guardia di Finanza that began in 2018. Mimmo Lucano was suspended as a mayor of Riace and also arrested on charges of aiding and abetting illegal immigration on the 2nd of October 2018, when the Ministry of the Interior was under the responsibility of Matteo Salvini. So following his arrest in 2018, the integration project was closed and the city once again can be said to have gone back to the underpopulation levels it had before. So in the last years, Riace became a very well-known mediatic case in Italy, but I believe also in Europe. In fact, a large part of national politics and politicians and therefore the media have promoted what can be called a crusade against Mimmo Lucano, which was often supported by fake news aimed at preventing the continuation of the Riace experience and also discrediting the representative actor, which is Domenico Lucano. We see that over a 15-year span, the model experimented in Riace has been described and documented and studied many times and by many people. And so we hope that with our interdisciplinary study and moreover, the continuation, which will be published in 2022, will be interesting to understand the case of Riace within the more general European panorama. Okay, so I will leave the word to Alessandro, which will present the first essay, part of our publication, written by him.
Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you, Fulvia. And I introduce my paper, which is the first in the eDossier, and we decided to put it in the first part because it has it tries to give a general outlook about the question of migration, trying to find a different point of view on the question, because the fact is that our research group is not doesn't think that in the most in many cases, we can say in the totality of the cases, the question of migration is not in a, okay, I can see me now. Okay, in most cases, the question is something like a dividing question between two poles, we can say, between someone who think to migration like part of the general global process, the process of globalization, and another part which is always or often the part of the nationalist right that thinks that the migration is a problem of sovereignty and it is a problem of control on borders. We can say that these are both two partial ideas, and because we usually thought, we usually think in the debate that they are conflictual ones, but the reality for us is that they are complementary. They are both part of a capitalist idea of migration. So my paper tries to link the structural question of migration, that is to say that the idea of migration from the point of view of the capitalist process, that is to say the circulation of workforce, of labor power, so the workers as a commodity. I usually use the expression the human commodity, because this is the point of view of the capital, and this is the way in which, for example, most of the stakeholders of the global compact think to this to migration. And so I decided to accept, just for a scientific approach, this idea, and trying to express all the strengthness of the migration as an analytic tool, and using both point of views, the capital one and then the labor one, because the most important thing in migration is that it is a circulation process that in an objective way is a workforce process. So it is seen as a as movement of a commodity by the capital, but by the labor, by people, is a process, a circulation process of people. And then we can see the core of the importance of migration as a tool, as an analytic tool, because the same phenomenon gives the possibility to study the same object with two different point of views that are conflictual. So this is the general framework of my essay, which is an essay between philosophy and law and international law and global law, which is and global constitutional law, which is a quite new field of research in law, and where we usually study the question of the creation of the global order as a legal order that comes from the creation of the world market. So let's see what is the role of the global compact in this framework. It is we have to say that the global compact is a tool of soft law, so it is not part of hard law. It has not the same strengthness, the same strength of other kind of agreement, international agreement, but it gives the chance to states, and not only states, because it is a pact that wants to coordinate state and private sectors corporation in migration management. Migration management is part of the global governance, which is this new idea of not a government, so not a political government of the market, but something that gives a regime to regulate the global process that comes from the creation of the world market, but with nothing that is properly legal. It is something that is close to the law, but is not the law as we can usually think. So something that comes from the popular sovereignty and decisions of parliament and other things like it. So I was telling about the Global Compact. It is a soft law agreement that tries to unify all the dimensions of migration management, focusing on consolidating legal frameworks, because the problem in building a world market of workforce is that we have different regimes between the global north and the global south, between the global east and the global west, and it is a problem, as we say in our works, for the capital, because having different regime is a problem, because it creates a limit on the circulation, and so it is a problem for the valorization of the capital. So the first part is consolidating legal frameworks. The second part is the guarantees and the rights for migrants. We can say this is a problematic part, because in all the countries in which governments decided not to sign the Global Compact, and Italy was one of these, this part about rights for migrants was the core of the protests against governments that decided not to sign the pact. And we can say that we know it is a very important thing, the part about the rights for migrants, but it is important, and this is what we say in our work, to understand what is the aim to in design this kind of guarantees, because in the Global Compact, the idea is something very close to the neoliberal idea of human capital. So it's something that it is very related to the creation of the market and the use of rights for migrants as something that is something which is a tool for not to not to give problems to different regimes for circulation of the workforce, and also to not to have discrimination, not only on the field of the people, but also on the field of the workforce, from their different origin and their different stage in the global value chain. So it is a very difficult issue to present, because we are, all of us, we are very close to the fight that migrants every day has, but we have to be very smart about this new tool of regulation of migration. Our idea is that the protection system is something that has to be in a constitutional idea. So where there is a very important field, a very important space for self-power of people and migrants also. And this is not the case of the Global Compact. As you can see in this specific slide, we have a map of the different countries that decided to sign the pact. We have to put this fact in the correct period. It was the 2018. So, for example, we can see that the United States decided not to join the pact. You can see they are in a red. They are red in this map. But we have to think that there was the administration of Trump. So they were very close to other countries like the Australian, Austria, and the bloc of Visegrad, and they thought about they had the idea that the global compact could be detrimental to the sovereign jurisdiction over the control of their borders, but they did not make any criticism about the idea that of the neoliberal idea of the human capital and the capitalistic framework of the global compact. These countries are totally part of the capitalistic countries, and but they have a different position about the regime of borders, and they had specifically the United States under Trump government. They had a different idea about developing their specific formation of capitalism. So I think it's quite interesting a thing about the design. It is that Italy had the chance to be maybe the last country to not to sign the agreement using this its constitution as a limit, because our constitution is based on the idea that living work is more important than work. I explain that workers are more important than workforce, than labor power. So we have a constitution that is, in fact, some in a contrary as in an idea of a capitalist circulation of workforce. But the Italian government that was led by Lega and Five Stars was a right government, and they decided not to sign, not because they were close to migrant workers and to workers in general, but because they were a government of a big country that cannot manage the idea of open process, open circulation of workforce in the world market that was the core of global compact. I'm going to the end of my paper. You can see that it's quite full of issues, and it's quite hard work to put everything in the same context, also because the field of research is quite new, as I told in the first part of my speech. But I think that it's quite important to understand why migration is a very good tool for to understand our specific period of capitalism, because we have to understand that migration is the only specific thing that could have seen like a merchandise, like a commodity in the idea of the capital. So something which is very, very close to the idea of the material capital and the idea of the a world without borders, but at the same time it is made by human beings that exist, and that they usually try to have a better life, trying to go from one country to another, even if they are against the direction that could be better for the capital. So we can see that in the conflict between the economy, the place of the economy, so this overworld where capital thinks to be the sovereign, and that thing, and where it thinks that there is no boundaries and everything is under the totalitarian command of the capital. It is something that migration could could fight, because it's the question of the circulation of work, and we are studying about the idea that the turbulence of migration, the fact that it's very, very, very difficult nowadays to design and to study and to identify migration flows, is a part of a process of global self-valorization of working class. That is the first part, the first step of a process of subjective determination. So we think that we are facing a different way of class struggle, a class struggle made by feet, if we can use an expression by an important communist leader of the past. And what is important for us is to understand how this kind of class struggle, work class struggle, is made by migrants, and trying to unify this dimension with the dimension of the workers in countries like European countries, and try to understand how to fight the rhetoric that thinks that these these workers, the migrants, and the citizens that are also workers in the global north, to fight the rhetoric that thinks that they are part of a struggle, one against the others. We are against this idea, and we think that our research could explain why. And the Riace, and I finish, Riace was, we can say, an example of the meeting between workers and poor workers, and of a very little Italian municipality, with migrant workers coming from outside Europe. And I think, but I will say this maybe in answering the question, we think that Riace was an example, and for this the focus was on it, and maybe it was his real problem, and the starting of the problem that Mimo Lucano had in recent years. Thank you for the attention.
Okay, now going forward to Francesco's work. Francesco Nurra, just a brief introduction. He graduated in historical and oriental sciences at the University of Bologna, and is currently undertaking a PhD in urban and regional development at the Polytechnic University of Turin. So he argues, so his paper is entitled Riace as an Informal Labor Management Case, a Position Paper. So he argues that in nowadays capitalism, the only mobility guaranteed is the one of commodities, and whereas the mobility of people is not guaranteed. So migrants mostly enter in a labor exploitation system characterized by the intensification, diversification, and the heterogenization of labor. Considering specifically labor related to migrants, global data, especially in Western countries, widely demonstrate the presence of migrants mostly within low wages and less paid sectors in general. So most of the time, migrants arrive from global north countries with high and specialized skills and education. But because of many factors, between which the local needs for different skills, racism, and xenophobia, all these contribute to their exclusion for a better paid labor market sector. And so this global situation for migrants then tends to cause the research for jobs inside ethnic characterized communities, and often to find them in the so-called informal sector. Disconnected system of institutional racism leads to having these struggles against neoliberalism. So I think it's interesting what this citation from Emin in 2014, which wrote that underdevelopment is not a delay, but the concomitant product of development. So the social structures produced in the peripheries are not vestiges of the past. The submission of the society distorted the earlier structure and shaped them in such a way as to make them useful to imperialist expansion of global capitalism, which is inherently polarizing. So workers in the informal sector, for example, continually growing in number and proportion in the peripheral south, are not vestiges of the past, but products of capitalist modernity. So I think it explains itself, but basically we do not consider the informal labor related to migration as something new, but as something part of the global system we find ourselves in. So going forward, currently, there are some labor regimes and sectors that have a prevalence of migrant labor, which are often characterized by extreme labor exploitation. For example, the economy of harvesting vegetables, and also the domestic and care labor, which all over the world is this last one, the domestic and care labor is carried out by a majority of female migrant workers. So all these sectors are often linked to informality. So these new labor regimes can be considered both as nowadays slavery and a way to survive inside the inequality of the capitalist system. So we see that migrants, both in the global north and in the global south, often start to work in the informal sector of the economy because it's the only way to survive and the only alternative to the formal labor regime. Also, it has been found that social networks highly influence the economic survival of migrants. Therefore, a migrant who finds a community within the same ethnic origin or national prevalence could take a better advantage. The larger the community, the better the social network, and therefore also income. So Francesco argues that informal labor follows different paths in different places. So low-paid and informal jobs sometimes guarantee a safety net and a way to survive for migrants, but they also follow an extremely powerful capitalist logic. There is this conflict between the informal economy and the institutional management of this formality. And this ambivalence could be only defeated by starting to decriminalize informal labor and also by avoiding a neoliberal management of informality. Also, he mentions the concept of multitude, which is elaborated by Hart and Negri, as particularly useful to explain the wide range of subjectivities behind an equally large variety of typology of struggles. So these practices, the practices of the multitude are not static, but they are an ongoing process. And the issue of informal labor and an overall perspective of a European management of informality and migration are often related to the insurgence and emergence of social movements from the multitude I was speaking earlier to bring forwards also the petitions of migrants. So within this framework, we see that also at the Italian level, with the Global Compact, which Alessandro introduced earlier, can be considered a response toward migration, but also so it can be said that it offers a sophisticated toolbox to use to manage migration, but also it lacks the moral leadership behind it. So the response from the experience of Riace to migrations, it's very different and can be considered completely outside to the far-right racial hatred against migrants and the neoliberal global compact that rather manages migrants as workforce and not, let's say, human. So despite the media distortion regarding Lucano's policies, his administration response tried to trace a different route that consisted of managing migration through citizenship and also migrant labor through migrant skills. Therefore, this kind of response can be considered innovative to migration management as it tries to help migrants reach self-determination. And that's what makes Riace different from what we've seen basically in Italy earlier, and why also it became so famous. So now I will pass the word again to Alessandro to speak about Andrea Devoto's work.
Okay, thank you, Fulvia. Now I'm going to speak about the paper of Andrea Devoto. He's graduated in law at the University of Sassari and has attended the School of Specialization for Legal Profession at La Sapienza in Rome, and now he's a lawyer, so he works on the field and mainly operates in criminal and immigration law. And he focused about the question of fundamental rights, the fight against irregular immigration and its limits, and trying to find a new approach to the regulation of migration. So he tries to focus about the national issue of the migration. So he started by 3 questions. That the first is if the Italian legal system is equipped with suitable tools to guarantee structured paths of inclusion and integration. He is very he usually makes this difference between inclusion and integration because they are different, because they, as you can read in the paper, there is difference between the approach on the existence and the life of the migrant. The second question is about the humanitarian administrative practice, if they are suitable to guarantee security and public order, because we had lots of cases in our specific, mainly in the regime that we studied, the Italian one, where the idea to stock the migrants in a warehouse, like they are center where most of them are stay for months. They are not. They are something which is very, very against the idea of security, public order that is usually led by right, and but not only for this, because also for the question of the link with the criminal organization. The first question is if the legislator is subjected to particular constitutional limits in the fight against irregular immigration. So, and Andrea says that the administrative experience linked to the welcoming policies carried out by Lucano, former mayor of Riace, provides the jurist with some food for thought. And if the Italian legal system is equipped with suitable tools, as I said, if the humanitarian administrative practices are suitable to guarantee security, and if in which are the constitutional limits in fight against irregular immigration. To offer the correct answers, the scholar cannot avoid analyzing the regulatory framework of reference, which is an imperfect synthesis of opposing needs. On the one hand, the need to protect borders and sovereignty, and on the other, the irrepressible need to protect and promote fundamental human rights, rights that belong to human beings as such, regardless of their status civitatis. So this is, as you can see, something that I was talking about in my paper. So the idea that there is an ambivalence in migration, and this ambivalence is a problem when you are going to decide from which point of view you are you will stay to regulate the phenomenon. The Riace experience has been presented as a virtuous practice of inclusion and respect for human rights. One thinks of the many opportunities for work and emancipation that the foreign guests of Riace enjoyed before the ministerial administrative measures intervened, which together with the criminal proceedings led to the end of Mimmo Lucano's political experience and the reception system of the small village in the Locri district. A balanced approach to the problems posed by an epoch-making human phenomenon such as immigration requires a third-party impartial study to understand the extent to which the Riace system can be defined as a virtuous model from a regulatory point of view. Scholars cannot stop at this stage at the conclusion reached by the court of Locri. What is needed is a further intellectual effort, free from prejudice and respectful of the sacrosanct principle that postulates the presumption of innocence. The words of the sentence issued by the Court of Locri are not set in stone, but they are helpful because they allow us to study closely what happened in the small town of Locri. In terms of substance, an attempt was made in Riace to put into practice the principles expressed in the formal constitution, formal Italian constitution, by offering shelter and hospitality to foreigners in need. From a methodological point of view, something went wrong. Just as it would be wrong to take a justicial approach to analysis, the reader cannot be motivated by feel-good sentimentality. Such an approach is harmful as well as legally inadmissible. If we want to understand the Italian legal system, we have to think that the Italian legal system was thought usually under emergencies period. So we have immigration policies on one hand that are which aim is to regulate entry flows and identify the minimum legal requirements for staying in the country, which are different from the policies for immigrants that create the conditions to protect the migratory path of foreigners who must be guaranteed useful tools for integration. But the problem with the Italian legal system on migration is usually the lack of coordination on policies for migrants. So you have to take a look to the difference between immigrants and migrants. Policies for migrants, which aim is to regulate the measure of initial reception and assistance for people already present in territory, but whose legal status is uncertain. So, for example, asylum seekers, people staying for humanitarian reasons, unaccompanied foreign minors, victims of trafficking, or illegal or irregular foreigners, who can enjoy essential services informally and thanks to the assistance offered by third sector association, so by the social private association. We think that an advanced democratic community, like we hope that Italy is, should embark on a season of radical reforms about these three issues that I said before, and in specific, make regularization tools more efficient, make administrative procedures more flexible and guarantee jus culturae. I have to say for people that in Italy, for people from abroad, that in Italy we have a very strong debate about the citizenship law. And we can say that we have our fascist ancient principles about the idea of jus sanguinis, so something that is that gives you a citizenship from from parents or grandparents that are Italian. And then we have the question about the jus soli. So if you are if you were born in Italy, you can become a citizen after some steps. And then there is a third position about ius culturae, and which is the fact that it is not important if you are a son of an Italian citizen or if you are born in Italy. But the thing is that if you are close to the national culture, it is interesting about for me that I am a constitutional law scholar, because in Italy the idea is that culture is not something close to nationalism, because we have a constitution which is against nationalism from the first article, which is the article about the popular sovereignty. So about the most important rule about we can say the most nationalistic rule. And our idea is that the ius culturae has to be in the same path of the first article of the Constitution, that says that Italy is a democratic republic founded on labor. And when it says this, we can read in the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly, they were thinking about the idea that between capital and work has to be dominant against capital. This is about our formal constitution, our text, which is very different from the material constitution. So the constitution, how is applied from the ordinary law and from the administrative procedures. I have to say that we are trying to give to the left in Italy and also abroad an idea about a strategy to mix the question about work and the question about migration. So the interest of Andrea about the Riace experience is about the project. If the project of Riace was aimed at putting into practice the principles expressed in the formal constitution by offering shelter and hospitality for needs in need, as I was telling. And if it was a spontaneous and self-managed practice of inclusion located within a normative, supranational, national grid of purely securitarian emergency nature. We think, Andrea thinks, that the problem for Riace was also from the fact that Riace had a very advanced inspiration, but it was in a very securitarian grid of a very securitarian legal framework. And so there was a contrast, and this contrast is what gave the chance to the judicial process. So, to what extent can the Riace system be defined as a virtuous model from a regulatory point of view? This is a problem for us that we are lawyer and jurists. And the other question is that if Mimo Lucano has succeeded in realizing his utopia. We know from many interviews of Lucano that he knew about the thing. He was trying to do something that was out of the law. The title of his last book is The Outlaw. So he knew about this, and we are trying to focus about the change that the Riace model could have in a legal framework which is not close to the constitutional principles that I was saying before. So, and the third question, very important, is that if the premises are the ones I said, if has there ever been a Riace model? I think it's quite interesting, because we think that we have to do this distinction between inspiration about Riace and between model. And maybe it could be interesting for our question before. if someone wants to know this distinction, because for us it's one of the core of the future conclusions of the project. So we can give you a spoiler about this. And then if the other thing, if the Riace experience has been helpful by pure chance in reawakening scholars' interest in a neglected subject, but of central importance. We think that Riace was an occasion, was an opportunity to focus about the problems that me and Fulvia and I were saying at the start of our speech. That the idea to change the point of view on migration between the mainstream point of view, the liberal one, but also the nationalistic and idea by right and far right. So this is what we decided to do, a proper analysis that need to be conducted, taking distances from either a justicialist and a do-goodist approach, trying to be objective, to have a good base, to have also a political position after with a scientific approach in its foundations. So I think that I said most of the issues about the paper of Andrea, which is very interesting, and I suggest everyone to give an eye to this, because I think it's a very good base to discuss in Italy, but not only in Italy, also in Europe, and maybe also after in other countries, to try to find a new approach about the question of migration and law and regulation of this phenomenon with a different approach, which puts the human being as a worker and his power as a worker in the core of the proposal of law, of migration law. Thank you.
Okay, so now I will go on quickly, very quickly, describe my paper. The title is Fake News and the Spread of Disinformation Regarding Migration. So first of all, it's important to define what fake news are. So they can be defined as a deliberate attempts and the distortion of news, the use of filtered versions to promote ideologies, confuse, sow discontent, and create polarization. So we see that in Europe, and actually all over the world, there is a very high presence of fake news and disinformation, in particular related to migration, and in particular related to far-right movements, which also underpins the political discourse on international migrations. So why are fake news produced? So the motivation behind the creation of fake news can be twofold. First of all, it's financial. Because by converting outrageous fake news going viral in revenues. And also, on the other hand, we see an ideological motive behind fake news because they promote particular ideas or people, and often they do this by discrediting others, creating polarization and going as far as hindering normal political debates. So we see that fake news hide under the appearance of legitimacy. They need to appear real and to convince the audience, and they often derive from a network of fake news, of fake sites. And they do not only undermine the news credibility and also journalism legitimacy, but also the the topics they are built upon. And especially we see this in social media, in which where the source is often perceived at a distance, if not removed altogether. So we see also the phenomenon of fake news, it's rising increasingly in the digital age, and it's both socially and democratically problematic. In fact, a research by Baker and McStay in 2018 identified 3 main dangers in the spread of fake news. First of all, the fact that citizens are wrongly informed, and well-informed citizens are imperative to a democracy. Second of all, the amplification and reinforcement of fake news in a defined systems limits the exposure of the audience to competing views, and creating a sort of echo chambers. And third of all, fake news emotionally antagonize or enrage a certain part of the population, given their often affective and provocative nature. So we see that this information spreading on social media has been reported in European countries in different circumstances. For instance, the 2017 French presidential elections, or also the Catalan referendum, Brexit, and also until 2019 European election. So going on, we mentioned earlier how the European panorama is securitized. So there is a theory of securitization created by the Copenhagen School of International Relationship, according to which the forced displacement of people is framed as an existential security threat to a state and also to its society. So we see that suspension of regular protocols and restraint in the name of an emergency politics, which then justify the use of exceptional means, mostly policing and also military. So we see in the European policies regarding the management of migrant flows have been securitized, in particular through a speech act that renamed and re-understood migration as a security threat. They portray the security threat of migrants as a temporal and exceptional answer to what is happening in the Mediterranean. And this view has been permeating the European politics for more than a decade. So it basically fits back onto ideas. First of all, the insistence of we do not all fit here, and also the necessity to contain the fluxes to not destabilize our society. So portraying racially the migrants as a source of insecurity. So going on to, this is closely linked to the media representation of migration. So media have often framed migrants, and in particular refugees, as a threat, linking them to concerns on the loss of controls from institutions, and also portraying them as a dangerous invasion and a foreign and perilous other. There are 3 specific axes in the discourses that connect migration to security. So first of all, the association of migration with criminality. Second of all, the connection with the legal benefits of the welfare system, public services and social provision. And finally, the connection with the social instability as a result of a cultural and religious convergence. So the main narratives present in the media are, first of all, exceptionality. So what I've said earlier, a narrative in which there is the necessity to adopt these exceptional measures, even though the migration crisis has been going on for over a decade, to answer only temporarily, supposedly, a situation without control. Second of all, we see the problematization of migration. So the binary construction of migrants as either creating or having problems. So either from the right-wing press, which underlines the problems the migrants create, and also from the liberal press, which emphasizes the problems the migrants might have. Third, we see the dynamic of inclusion versus exclusion, and also the dichotomy between civilization and versus barbarous. So there is a clear language behind the inclusion and the exclusion that creates categorization, which of course differs according to class, gender, and ethnicity. And more often than not, migrants and refugees are objects of discourses that represent them as a threat to both national and cultural homogeneity and the social and political stability of the state. So legitimating the practices of exclusion. So we see another very important narrative we find in the media, also in Italy, but all over the world, is the bureaucratization. So the understanding of people as mere numbers, and not as political actors that have rights and have voices and can speak for themselves. Further on, we see the dichotomy as well between victims and villains. So on the one hand, the creation and strengthening of a paradigm and a prejudice that presents immigrants as deviant, whilst on the other hand, the creation of the image of a victim who must be saved and assisted. So the frequent exposure to such media messages, of course, leads to negative attitudes toward migration and may activate stereotypical cognition of migrant groups and even influence vote choices. So focusing on Italy, as has been seen also in other European countries, we see how immigration policy has been highly politicized and also being marked as a high issue salience and polarization. And also to answer also Giuseppe's question, we see this in the case of Riace. Of course, it was highly instrumentalized by the media and highly politicized, in particular its criminalization. In fact, well, before going on to speaking about Riace, just a little bit of detail about what are the programs and organizations that try to fight disinformation. So there are different actors involved. First of all, we can see European programs, for instance, the establishment of a high-level expert group, also the dissemination of the EU code of practice on disinformation, and they also establish a task force, even though these efforts have been criticized because of their focus on specifically Russia and the fake news that came from them. So we see that the EU efforts at the moment are not fully in proportion with the scale of the challenge, both in terms of volume of disinformation being produced and also the increasingly sophisticated technology being used to design and perpetrate disinformation campaigns. Second of all, also an alternative solution to the issue of fake news are legal ones, which go from banning outlets that spread fake news to prohibit anonymous sources. For instance, in France, Emmanuel Macron pushed a bill to ban the posting of fake news during the election period on social media and the internet. However, these solutions are often harshly criticized, as they would also restrict freedom of speech and information. Also, some other initiatives are the self-regulation measures implemented by media giants such as Facebook and Google and Twitter, which consist in filtering disinformation and cutting the financial resources of outlets that disseminate fake news. So, for example, there was a project by Wikipedia, which was called WikiTribune, which was launched by the founder of Wikipedia to filter clickbait traits and the content on the Wikipedia portal. Finally, we see fact-checking portals. So they are organizations whose objective is to check the content of certain statements and articles, determining the best sources to verify the facts and also explain to what extent do they match reality. So it is fundamental, of course, that their action to be in the phase of creation of publication of fake news, because then once the news is circulating, it is only possible to limit the damages. So they allow, on the one hand, to generate in the community awareness that a certain news can be false, and on the other hand, also they block the expansion of fake news. And I believe they are essential in the fight against fake news and are one of the most efficient and effective tools in correcting misinformation and also debunking negative statements. Also, they evolved over the year from just a tool of amateur bloggers to an established part of professional journalism. In fact, we see as of November 1st, of last year, 2021, the census of active fact-checking organization, which is done by the Duke University Reporters Lab, reached a total of 349 initiatives in 1,002 countries, which is a very exponential growth considering that in 2017 there were only 114 fact-checking outlets. So overall, so the best solution of all to tackle disinformation is education. And it is imperative that the readers are able to recognize fake news without having to rely on filters or fact-checking processes. So citizens should be educated in critical thinking at all levels, and also, for instance, since at the school, since they are young. So going on now to speak about Riace. The Riace model, as we said, was born out of the necessity of crossing two opposite phenomena. So on the one hand, we had the increasing emigration of local population, and on the other, the necessity to create an inclusion and integration system for the management of incoming migrants. So the Riace model was praised by many people when it was active by academics, politicians, and tourists who visited Riace. And also there are many books written on it and films which highlights the importance of Riace. So the criminalization of Mimmo Lucano since 2018 became a very instrumentalized media tool through which discredit the whole project. And also the media element is fundamental in understanding the development of the project of Riace, as Mimmo Lucano became effectively a symbol of the model itself, and he entered what we can call a media circus, heavily polarized and written with fake news. In fact, we see that a few of the fake news regarding Riace, and in particular Mimmo Lucano, concerns the accusation of the arrangement of false marriages to allow migrants to stay in the country after their asylum application was refused. Also, Lucano municipal electoral campaigns mixed results and its judicial process, among others. In Italy, there are different fact-checking websites who have all these news I'm telling you have been already debunked by them. For instance, I will name just a few: butac.it and also bufale.net, or also the AGI, the Journalistic Italian Agency. So we see that the media and political coverage has strongly personified the Riace experience in the figure of Mimo Lucano, also making him the point of the greatest fragility of the project. And it would have been important to separate Lucano responsibilities from the idea of Riace itself, so that Riace could continue possibly even beyond his actions. So we concluded the presentation of our publication. The project, as we said at the beginning, has continued another year, and it will be published in its entirety in a few months in Italian, and also the second part will come out as another e-publication with Transform in the next month. In the future work, we continue analyzing the case of Riace, following what we presented today, but also with a specific focus on the legal processes, and in particular the proceedings that were just published last month. Okay, so
thank you very much, both of you. Congratulations also to your presentation. Even for me, that I know the project already, was very interesting to hear it one more time. We slightly exceeded the time we had promised for this presentation, but I guess, yes, judging by the reactions of the audience, it was very well received. There are a couple of questions already for you two. One of Giuseppe was already touched from Fulvia. I think the question was more, yes, do you conclude that Mimo Lucano was
the actual
targeted, yes, also with the fake news campaign, etc. The second question and the third question actually both come from Milena, but I find both very interesting. The one is, do you evaluate at the end of it all? Perhaps this is also an open question for the second part of the study, whether or not the Riace paradigm could be a blueprint for the left in order to intertwine labor struggles and migrant struggles. And the second question she asked is if you are in contact with other international legal teams that check or have a similar take to the Global Compact of Migration. I think I would we would start with the last question, going up to the first, and I would ask Alessandro to try to have a take on it, but please take care of the time and try to answer maybe in 3 minutes the last question. Okay, so are you in, how is the let's say international discussion on the topic, on the Global Compact?
So it's for me, okay. Well, I start from the question about the Global Compact. I think that we built our first step, and it is important to make a network between across Europe about an alternative path to migration regulation with this point of view of the predominance of work and workers on the neoliberal idea. For about the representation of the Global Compact, I think there is a difference between we can say between institutional left and social left. I think that I don't know if it is correct to say this also across all the Europe or all the Europe, but I think that there is more consciousness in social left and also in people that have experiences in field about the real issues of migration. I think that there was a lot of rhetoric about the global compact, so it would be very difficult to have an alternative point of view that it has not seen close to the right, because we are not against human rights. We are for power to human beings, which is similar but is not the same. And we believe in power to the people and not only right, because if no one will defend your rights, if you have no power, you can't defend your right by yourself. So we prefer right and power at the same time. By the way, I don't know if there was a second question.
There was also the second question, and you answered part of it, but maybe you can continue with it. So I then give the floor to Fulvia. The second part of the question was whether or not, at the end, from what we have studied until now, do you think that Riace is a first blueprint we can use on the left to have a new approach, also in organizational terms? I mean, perhaps I will take advantage of Milena's question to put my own question in this context, being myself also member of a left organization. What are the good parts of Riace? What are the parts of the approach of Riace that you think the left across the continent should take a careful look at and could try to implement perhaps better in their case?
Yes, I try to be very quick. About the idea of Riace as a blueprint for other European countries, I have to say that after our research, we think that Riace was something very strange, we can say, also in Italy, because the particular territory and other features and characteristics. By the way, as I told before, we have to make a distinction between model, which is something that you can replicate with no differences or little differences, and inspiration. I think that Riace, in his long story, that is a very complex story and different, because it has a part of social movement and a part of institutional, a part of administrative procedures, and a part of something that was not in the context of the state, we can say, the state policy. We have to save the inspiration of Riace, but we have not to think that we can take from Riace and from other places a model, because we have to build we have to make a general framework with an idea, and I think I can answer also to Caterina's answer. We need a general framework, but we have to understand that we are talking about process of self-valorization of people, and they have to be free. It means that people, migrants, but I want to say workers, because I could be also part of a migrant. Maybe I was during my studies, and I didn't think about me as a migrant, but I want to say that we are all part of the same field, if we stay all the life in our birthplace. I think that we have to understand that we have to give power and to make something which is similar to a self-government of migration. I know it is something like an utopia, but we know that we comes from 200 years of an utopia that step by step is coming to reality. So I think that we have to say that we are in the good way.
So workers are workers, something to be reminded also in the left. I read you we have the obligation also to get organized with migrant workers, no matter what their legal status is. And at least in the spaces where we have democratic control, like the unions, our parties and organizations, make sure that they have merit like all of us. And they participate in the co-governance of our spaces, no? So Fulvia, I would like to give you the floor also for your take to the questions.
Okay, yeah, I agree with Alessandro in everything he said. I believe that behind the Riace, certainly there was a genius, well, a very good ideal, and also a very good implementation strategy because of the depopulation of the local territory and the need and the continuous migration that we see in Italy, but also in Europe. So I think on an ideological level, it should be more than feasible, but then we see that in practice it can be very difficult. And also, being my analysis on media, I would like to add the societal representation of migrants and the media have a big impact on also the perception of the receiving society. So for there to be an integration, there needs to be also good communication and integration with the receiving society. And at the moment, politically, it seems to be very far away and not so close, but it shouldn't be. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Fulvia.
Okay, so I think, well, we went past 8. I don't know if
we
there
have
are any other questions.
There is Giuseppe that I think would like to enter an exchange with you. We may do this as well, but if it is okay, I would like to stop the recording first. So let me, in terms of today and the original plan, thank you again for taking the time, your preparation, your effort for this study, and all your thoughts that you shared with us. And on behalf of Transform, we look forward to the next steps of the project, which is very, very important, of strategic importance, I might add. So I will stop the recording now, and then I will promote Giuseppe to a panelist so you can freely exchange. Okay?
Thank you.